Peter Hamilton's Figure Transformations, and what I want to discuss today is kind of what happens to our knees as we age. A lot of times we're thinking our quadriceps and our hamstrings are playing a pivotal role in our movement patterns. And for years my right quadricep was just getting so tight, I would kind of pull out or sprain my knee, so to speak. And I realized kind of what's happening is my hip wasn't allowing me to move the way I wanted. So all too often when I see people doing a lunge or squat, what's happening is their knees kind of buckling in. And I tried for years to exercise this out. And I now understand what I had to do first is kind of loosen up my hip and get the muscle fibers fired again. My gluteal muscles had become so tight that they weren't allowing my leg to stay straight. It's kind of hiking up this hip because of the tightness that had formed from an old injury when I was squatting. And I now realize our glutes are playing such a pivotal role in our movement patterns, and we're not really understanding, because a lot of times we don't end up with kind of pain or discomfort in our glutes. But what's happening is the tissue is becoming so tight that they're restricting the movement pattern and kind of pulling the knee basically out of alignment. Eventually is what's going to lead to somebody needing a knee replacement, or again even having kind of pain or discomfort in the knees. Now there's kind of ways to avoid it over the years, but kind of we're putting a band-aid on the problems, if you will. And I was doing it for years, trying to kind of squat but keeping all my weight back, and kind of trying to fire from my glutes, but I realized I was firing too much from my glutes. I was tensing too much and I wasn't loosening the tissue enough through here. And I feel like all of us, myself included, I would foam roll, I would try and stretch, but I would do kind of very limited stuff in that regard. I put exercise above everything else. And now while exercise is important to keep the fascia moving, you also got to understand that we need our bones to be in kind of proper alignment, and all too often our bones are getting kind of misaligned, if you will. I mean, you can look at somebody's posture and kind of just look and start to see and understand kind of what's happening. So what I started to do and realize is I need to loosen my hip. So finally now my knee is starting to get at a better angle. Now the tissue in the fascia here, I'm realizing it's just nasty from years of improper angles. Okay, everything comes down to an angle in terms of exercise. What is a good angle? What's a bad angle? And a lot of us unintentionally are using what I would consider a bad angle. So, my left hip is much better. I can stay much straighter, keep my hips even. But again, I even realize now that this hip is really way too high. And again, it's because my glute is just like rock hard. So a lot of times we're thinking rock hard muscles, that's our kind of goal or achievement, but we got to understand if it's rock hard, it can't move anymore. It's kind of sticking in that position, and all too often it is throwing us out of position. So especially with my right hip, as I come into this thing kicks out way to the side. Even if I were to get this down, it's still extremely hard. Now again, this is much better than it has been in years. Probably a decade, honestly. I realized again it was kind of slowly working its way out, or into a bad position, I should say. And again, it's our kind of deep gluteal muscles kind of hinge over, again, even up here. So this is all glute. Glute med is our abductor, right? But also what it does is, if you kind of look at the muscle, it pulls the hip up. So if I'm going into an abduction, honestly what I'm doing is kind of pulling the femur up. And all too often that is getting overused. It's supposed to be a stabilizer too. So kind of when I'm standing or balancing, it should be stabilizing me or helping. And that's what we should be looking at in terms of our movement patterns is, what is balance? I can feel myself getting pulled, okay, to the medial aspect. And no matter how hard I tried over the years, now I can make compensations. I could hike this hip up a little bit to force that stabilization. But now I'm creating another imbalance, and that's kind of what happens throughout the years is we're transitioning from one imbalance to another imbalance to another, and our body's very resilient, so it doesn't notice all too often until we end up with a pain or discomfort that we're having these imbalances. And through percussion therapy is the only way that I've been able to really fix incredibly my body and move fascia like nobody's been able to do before for years. I finally feel more comfortable with this right foot, where I thought at some point I was going to need surgery. on the ankle, and I realized the surgery was because of the hip, because the hip controls the knee controls the foot. Now, if I can't fix here, and kind of all too often what's happening is I would kind of maybe sit cross-legged. So what am I doing? I'm shortening those glutes. Okay, they're tightening, and you know, people get, you know, this is why people sit like this as well. What's happening? My glutes are pulling my legs out of position. Now we just think, oh, well, I can just do this, and I did this too myself, and I can realign myself. Well, no, the tightness is still there. So unless I kind of work on breaking up the scar tissue and the tightness there, I'm really just sacrificing one imbalance for another. So now I'm overusing my adductors to try and get these thighs closer together and internally rotated. So our bodies are constantly playing this kind of tug of war. And if I ever want to fix my knee like I'm doing now, I got to start at the hip. Okay, same thing with the upper body. If I was to fix the arm or the elbow, I got to start at the shoulder. We got to look at the bigger mover, what's providing the most range of motion through the movement pattern, and then finding out what is restricting us the most. And it's kind of easy when you start thinking about it, at least in my opinion, from a body perspective, is, you know, we all think we're in this kind of perfect, anatomically correct positions, and our muscles are doing what they're supposed to. But if you take that bone and you move it a centimeter, now these muscles are performing differently constantly. Now if I move it another centimeter and another centimeter. So over time, our bodies are not performing the way that we're thinking. Now again, if you're somebody who's getting all your exercises in, changing all your movement patterns, doing a great job of hitting all your body parts, all your different angles, then sure, you know. But again, even me being a personal trainer for, you know, well over a decade at this point, you know, studying this stuff for well over 20 years, I know it's kind of almost impossible. You know, you need to be spending a couple hours a day in the gym in order to be doing that, and we need to be doing that when we're in our 20s and sustaining it throughout the rest of our life. Again, a lot of exercises we do not take us through a full range of motion pattern. I see all too often people squatting and they're stopping here. Okay? Now, okay, you're strengthening yourself, but only through that portion of the movement pattern. You're not helping yourself by not going through the whole range of motion. Same thing with push-ups. A lot of people can't do a push-up, but they'll do a chest press or a dumbbell, not realizing, again, the scar tissue is already created and altering the movement. And that's all too often why we're kind of tense, and it's really hard to fix things once we become tense. So in order for me to fix my knee movement or my knee pain or issues, I got to start up here. Now, I've already kind of gone through a lot of the hard work and kind of worked in some of my other videos, if you check them out, the scar tissue in my glutes. Now, there's a tremendous amount there. Don't let, kind of when you're standing, the muscle here fool you, okay? The muscle's really big, really deep, and, you know, unless your knee's going in a perfect angle, which I know neither of mine are not, I have this indentation that's, again, everything's getting pulled to that medial aspect, okay? And that's what happens over time. Our bodies are just constantly playing tug of war. So what I have to start to do, and what I've been doing, to fix my knee and my hip issue is I've been targeting my glute. You know, if you can start to do this, you know, the more the better, about 15, 20 minutes a day on either hip or glute that you're kind of looking at, and just kind of keep working the fascia, it will continue to move. It's just, again, just like exercise, it promotes healthy movement patterns and fascia movement. And no matter how much stretching you do, it's only going to take you to the point that the scar tissue is there, unless you're holding for like absurd amounts of time. But again, we also have to get our equal and opposite what's happening. Okay, my quadriceps getting overused, my adductors are getting overused, pulling my knee medially. So I need to get better adduction or external rotation. And now we think just because the leg's rotating that everything's working fine. But if you kind of check on the side of your leg, you're going to notice that there's a bunch of, it feels like bone, okay? But unfortunately, it's not bone. It's scar tissue that's developed over the years, and you'll kind of feel it up underneath here too. Again, I realized my hip for years hiked up. So as I start to break the scar tissue up, now I can start to break the scar tissue up here and kind of realign the muscles and get the fascia moving the way that it's supposed to. And that's the biggest or most important thing in understanding when we're kind of fixing an issue or an injury. We have to follow the movement pattern all the way up. So if I was having knee pain, again, I got to look at why am I overusing that muscle, okay? It's not that simple of like, okay, well, we'll do X, Y, and Z in terms of rehabilitation exercises because now we're going to strengthen this. Well, now you strengthen this, and now this is pulling harder too, and vice versa. And that's kind of what just happened over our lifetimes is we're tightening one side to tighten the other, to tighten the other, and it's just this kind of domino effect that happens throughout our life. So if you follow the videos on this in terms of how to fix the knee, okay, we got to start with the hip. If you watch the videos on different ways to loosen up the glute, you can do it from kind of standing up, okay, kind of leaning. And that's what we all should kind of be doing more. I'm going to do a video more on that too, is in terms of kind of form when we're moving. And it's more about too when you're outside of the gym. A lot of us go to the gym and we try and do good form and proper mechanics, but unfortunately when we leave the gym, those are kind of the most important times, and our posture that we're taking when we're outside of the gym is more important because that's what we're going to take into the gym with us, okay, when we go to exercise. And I've known it for years, I just didn't have a way to help everybody. And fortunately now, since and I'm going to start putting this out there too, I've documented everything I've been doing with my own body. I'm going to kind of create a different playlist in terms of just kind of following along with what I've been doing these last few months to help my own body and kind of make these discoveries that are kind of life-changing in my opinion for myself and I think for others as we kind of start to understand truly kind of what fascial lines are, what scar tissue is, how it's changing our movement patterns and what we can kind of do to adapt and change it, and how we can make lasting kind of change. I never thought I could fix this right leg, and you know, I finally am fixing it. This whole hip was just a mess, and it was going to continue to become a mess. No matter how much exercise I threw at it, I was doing martial arts, you know, trying everything for years. And I finally realized, well, until I can loosen this hip up and create some good movement pattern, I can't start to kind of fix it, okay? So I'm cycling, and I have so much more power because my body is at the right angles, okay? Just think of something, if it is at a powerful angle, it can work well. That's why a lot of times when people are squatting, the knees are going out or they're going in, they're trying to find power because the muscles are too tight and it doesn't feel comfortable. So it's trying to find a way to generate more force and more power. And a gentleman had talked to me about earlier today about explosiveness. And I was losing mine too as I age, and it's kind of something that happens, and what we're not realizing is the reason we're losing our explosiveness is because of our tightness. I'd say I'm maybe possibly even more explosive now since I started this than I was in my 20s. I still want to go a little bit further with this before I start really pushing that explosiveness because I want to make sure my body's in a good position. Yeah, hopefully this was helpful in terms of kind of understanding everybody's not this kind of perfectly anatomical correct, okay, when we're going to the gym. Myself included, I haven't been that way for years. And if we understand that, then we can understand that not just exercise alone is going to kind of fix everything for us like we think it will. Now, it will help without a doubt, but if we really want to truly change our bodies and move better and get better muscles, we want to get that fascia moving again and create better movement patterns. And this is even for people who don't exercise too often or at all. You can start to kind of really elicit change through your body with kind of percussion therapy, something I never thought possible. And up to date, I don't think anybody knows that it is possible. But I got the documentation and the proof that we're not all sitting like this. I know I definitely wasn't. But we can start to kind of hope to get back to that position at some day. And we can facilitate better movement and kind of do better things and kind of be more comfortable doing everything that we want to do. So this is, basically, again, on the hip and the knee. If you follow the other videos in terms of what we need to do, okay, again, it's hip, and more hip in order to kind of release this tissue. And the more time you spend loosening up your glutes and your hips, the better you're going to feel, without a doubt. Again, I've been doing this for a while now. It took me a while to understand what I needed to do. I was spending way too much time on my secondary muscles. Okay, we got to think of what the primary mover is on a lunge or a squat, and again, it is the glute. These guys follow suit depending on where that hip is in place. And so if that hip is too tight, Now my legs can't do what they're supposed to do, but they will find a way to work. And that's what we're missing a lot of times, is that we think we can do a movement pattern regardless of how it looks, and so we think we're flexible or can do anything, myself included. You know, that's why a lot of times people hinge forward. Their glutes are too tight, hips are too tight, so they can't sit upright when they're getting into a squat. And you know, we're thinking it's secondaries, we're thinking it's core. Don't get me wrong, it's a mixture of a lot of this stuff, but the biggest thing is what is eliciting the biggest movement there. And the more we can kind of start to do this, the better we'll start to be. All right, hopefully you found this helpful. Again, check out the other videos in terms of loosening your hips and the fascia, and it will change your life. Thank you.